This is the first in our series of debating law events, and our question tonight is, the debate is rape different? Just a couple of things. The event is being filmed. The setup is that we'll have each of our speakers speak for about 10 minutes, and then after that there should be plenty of time for you to ask questions. You can also tweet us your questions. We seem to be set up for Twitter, hopefully. So I'm told that you can follow the event at LSE Law, and if you want to tweet questions or comments, then the hashtag is LSE Different, LSE Different. And we hope to wrap the event up at about 8 o'clock. So, as I said, the question is rape different? And we've got 4 very eminent speakers who I think are very well placed to address and debate that question. So we have, starting nearest me, we have Helen Reece, who's a reader in the LSE Law Department. Then we have Jennifer Temkin, who's a professor at City Law School. We also have Barbara Hewson, who's a barrister at Hardwicke Chambers, and Nazir Afzal, who's Chief Crown Prosecutor for CPS North West England. So I'll just start by saying a few words. Why are we asking whether rape is different? No one is debating whether or not rape is a serious crime. I think that's agreed. But rape is also a controversial crime that is often in the media. One of the best-known facts about rape is that it seems to have a low conviction rate. About 7% of rapes reported to the police result in a conviction for the offence of rape. And that seemingly low conviction rate often is the subject of criticism and the suggestion, perhaps, that we treat rape complainants too sceptically. Another reason why rape and sexual offences are different is that they're the only offences where we have automatic anonymity for complainants. And that, of course, has recently caused debate about whether we should also extend anonymity to defendants in rape and sexual assault cases. Rape and other sexual assault cases are also often thought to create difficulties of proof. Often the key question in a case will be, was there consent? Did the complainant consent? That can be difficult to prove. Often it seems it will come down to being one person's word against another's. Given such difficulties of proof, judgments about what happened may be heavily influenced by our assumptions about sexual morality, about how men and women do and should act in intimate situations and their aftermath. Finally, sexual offences may be different because of the time span in which we are prepared to prosecute. So this summer, we saw Stuart Hall, aged 83, prosecuted for sex offences dating back to 1968. It seems that that's fairly rare in other offences. So again, is rape different? So the questions then for our panellists: is rape different to non-sexual crimes in these and other ways? And should we treat rape differently? So with that, I'll hand over to the first of our speakers tonight, Helen Reece.
Thank you very much, Mike. Can you hear me at the back? Please wave your hand if you can hear me. If at any, as Mike said, there'll be lots of times for questions at the end, but if at any point you can't hear me, please do let me know during this talk. So, as Mike has reminded us, the question that we're asking tonight is rape different? And I'd like to start by saying that I think that by the actual posing of that question, LSE and LSE Law Department has already done a huge service in the pursuit of knowledge, the pursuit of inquiry and the pursuit of debate. Why do I say that? Well, it's actually very rare to hear that question posed, at least explicitly. Normally, the answer to that question, is rape different, is assumed. Of course it is. It's unique. It's a crime apart. And the fact that the answer to this question, yes, is normally assumed, has some quite dangerous effects. Because what tends to happen is a statement is made about rape, which may, often, sometimes, literally be true when taken in its own terms. But the problem is that the way it's put is misleading, because the assumption behind the statement, the research, is that rape is unique in that respect. And actually, I would suggest that there's, if you like, a fault line that runs through discussions of rape, rape research, rape debates, that the comparison between rape and other crimes is very rarely made. Sometimes it is made in the literature, and when it is made, it leads to some quite interesting results. But more often, there is no comparison made. And in a way, that's actually my main point in my introductory comments, is that we need to ask that question, is rape different? That's my main point in the introduction, and to some extent, right through this debate, that it's important for us to make comparisons with other crimes and to do that repeatedly whenever we're discussing rape. So that question, is rape different, I'm very glad to have put on the table. Every time we're discussing a new issue in relation to rape, we need to ask ourselves, is rape unique in this respect? Or actually, would the answer be the same if we looked at this in relation to other crimes? So I'm very glad to be taking part in this debate. I think it's very welcome. Now, the area that I'm going to look at, the question of whether rape is different or not, is in relation to the very strong consensus that society is in thrall to what is described in the literature as rape myths, that the general public is gripped by what is often described in the literature as rape-supportive attitudes, attitudes that support rape. And what I'm going to be arguing in the next few minutes, and really throughout, is that the attitudes that the public has to rape are not so different from the attitudes that they have to other crimes, and are also not so bad. I'm going to be arguing that rape myths are not as prevalent, not as widespread as is suggested by that strong consensus. And there is a very strong consensus on the idea that rape myths are rampant throughout society. The general public believes rape myths. If you're in any doubt about this, and I guess most people in the room won't be, try typing rape myths into Google, and you'll see that every website that you care to look at, from Mumsnet through to the Home Office, CPS, wherever you look, the discussion goes along the lines of, these are the 5 rape myths to watch out for. These are the 10 most common rape myths. Don't fall prey to them. You will not, and I throw this challenge out to the audience, you will not find a website that is devoted to discussing whether rape myths exist. You will not find an internet forum that debates the question of whether rape myths are widely held. It just isn't there. This is a very strong consensus. Perhaps consensus isn't actually a strong enough word. So I do know what I'm up against in making this argument. I do appreciate that I am up against an incredibly strong consensus in my argument that rape myths are not, they do not have the grip on the public that is suggested. But I would say that when we're faced with a strong consensus, particularly on a social science question, it's particularly incumbent upon us to keep our eyes wide open. Because what can happen, very understandably, is once a strong consensus has emerged on a social science question, what can then happen is that research, ideas, opinions can slip under the radar, without being subjected to the critical scrutiny that they would have been subjected to had they gone more against the grain. So I am happy to be arguing against that strong consensus. I think it's our duty to do that, and perhaps it's particularly appropriate to do that at LSE, the home of social science. So in the time that I've got left, I want to look at what I want to suggest to you is that there are a number of techniques that social scientists, rape myth researchers use that lead them to the effect that rape myths are more rampant, more prevalent than they actually are. And in using the word techniques, I've tried to find the most value-neutral word that I could. These techniques or strategies, the ones that lead to this effect. And because time is limited, I'm just going to use one example here of what happens. And it's quite a useful one, because within this example, actually, you can see nearly all the techniques at work here. Obviously, you can read my article where I go through many more examples of this. And the example I'm going to use is the very strong consensus that people blame rape victims. Many of you may remember the headlines a few years ago now. 1 in 3 blames women for being raped. They were all over the media. They've been repeated many times since. And actually that idea has really buried itself very deep into the academic literature as well. So it's very much a consensus in itself that that's what the research shows. But actually, if you look at that research, I would suggest to you that it shows nothing of the kind. The research that gave rise to those headlines was carried out by Amnesty, no comment there. And what Amnesty did was it surveyed a large number of people in the UK, and it put to them a number of different scenarios where a woman might be raped, where she'd been flirting, drinking, where she'd got into bed with somebody else. And they asked the general public to say, in those circumstances, do you think the woman is responsible? And the public could answer yes, no, or partly. And sure enough, large numbers of the public answered either yes or partly, hence the 1 in 3 figure. But the thing that you can notice immediately about that research is that nowhere in those surveys was the word blame ever mentioned. And yet, the conclusion is drawn, 1 in 3 blames women for being raped. And this is a general point about the rape research. Surrogates for blame are often used. Sometimes it's responsibility, sometimes it's control, sometimes it's causal factors. But I haven't yet come across a survey that asks people explicitly about blame. A surrogate for blame is used, but the conclusion is drawn that people blame rape victims. But of course, responsibility is not the same as blame. Responsibility is a complicated concept, which on the one hand does point towards blame, but on the other hand points towards notions of causal attribution, of increase of risk. And from these survey results, it's impossible to know how many people were trying to say that women were to blame for being raped, and how many people were just simply trying to say that what the woman had done, hypothetically, could have increased the risk of rape. Maybe she would not have been raped had she behaved differently. And the thing that's very interesting about that, to the extent that people may have been saying the second of those statements, is not only is that a much softer thing to say than that women are to blame for being raped, it's actually true. The research is clear-cut, and it's really no surprise that certain forms of behaviour do increase the risk of rape. And this, again, is a general point about the Amnesty research that we can generalise out and see it operating elsewhere in rape myth research, that at least since 2007, rape myths have been defined as ethically wrong, not false. So we now have the rape myth, which by definition may not be false. And of course, if something is not necessarily false, then it may very well be true, as it is in that example.
Hi, Helen. Can you wrap up in about a minute? You did ask me to keep you to time.
You did, and I will do. OK. And that's very useful, because that takes me right back to the beginning. There are lots more criticisms that I would have of rape myth research, and there are lots more techniques that I would like to tell you about. But the last one, still in relation to the Amnesty research, takes me right back to the beginning of my talk. And that is the lack of any comparison. We have members of the public being asked, how responsible do you think a woman is if she flirted, if she was drunk, if she got into bed with somebody? But we don't have the comparison with other crimes. We don't have people being asked comparably, well, when someone's beaten up, when they're robbed, how responsible do you think they are when, they left their wallet there, or they walked down a road at night time, and so on. We don't have that comparison. And that is a general fault line running through rape myth research and rape research, and why I'm very, very happy to be taking part in this debate. Is rape different?
OK, thanks very much, Helen. So